Imagine you work for 40 years. You show up, you do your job, you get paid, and at the end of those 40 years, you open your account and realize that despite decades of earning, despite doing everything you were supposed to do, you have significantly less than you should. Not because you spent recklessly, not because anything went wrong, but because you left your money sitting still in a world that never stops moving. This is not a hypothetical. This is the financial outcome for millions of people who earn a reasonable income their entire working lives and arrive at retirement with far less than they expected. And the reason almost always comes down to the same thing. They never invested. They saved, but they never invested. And those two words, which most people treat as synonyms, describe two completely different outcomes over time. Here is what actually happens to money that sits still. Your savings account is not neutral. It feels safe. It feels responsible. Putting money into a savings account and watching the number grow feels like exactly the right thing to do. But a savings account is not protecting your money. It is slowly losing the race against a force that never stops running. That force is inflation. And inflation does not announce itself. It does not send a bill. It works quietly every single day, eroding the purchasing power of every dollar you hold. The Bank of Canada targets an annual inflation rate of 2%. That means that every year, the same amount of money buys roughly 2% less than it did the year before. At 2% annual inflation, $100 today has the purchasing power of approximately $67 in 25 years. You did not spend a single dollar. You did not lose anything in a market crash. You simply held the money, and inflation consumed a third of its real value, while you watched the number stay the same. Most savings accounts in Canada currently offer interest rates between 1% and 3%. In a high inflation environment, those rates may not even keep pace with the rate at which your money is losing value. You earn 1%. Inflation runs at 3%. Your real return is negative 2%. The account balance grew. Your actual purchasing power shrank. This is the first thing that happens to money that is never invested. It loses value silently and invisibly while appearing completely safe. Now, add the second force, opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the return you did not earn because your money was somewhere else. It is invisible. It never shows up on a statement. You will never receive a notification telling you what your uninvested money failed to become. But it is mathematically real, and the numbers are staggering. The S&P 500, the index tracking the 500 largest companies in the United States, has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over the past century, or approximately 7% after adjusting for inflation. These are not guaranteed returns. Markets fluctuate. Individual years can be brutal. But over long periods, diversified equity investing has consistently outpaced every alternative available to ordinary people. Here is what that means in concrete terms. $1,000 invested at age 25 in a low-cost index fund tracking the broad market left completely untouched for 40 years at a 7% average annual return becomes approximately $14,800 by age 65. That same $1,000 sitting in a savings account earning 1% over the same 40 years becomes approximately $1,490. The difference between those two outcomes is $13,300 from a single $1,000 investment. Now multiply that across every dollar you ever earned and chose not to invest. Researcher and author J.L. Collins, whose work on index investing has reached millions of readers, describes uninvested cash as an asset in a state of constant decay. The decay is invisible on the account statement. It is only visible when you compare what the money could have become to what it actually became. But the mathematics alone do not capture why most people never invest. The reason is psychological. Investing feels like risk. Saving feels like safety. And the human brain, as we have seen, is wired to avoid perceived loss, even when avoiding that loss guarantees a slower, quieter, more certain loss over time. The market drops 20% in a year and it feels catastrophic. Your savings account loses 2% of its real value to inflation every year, and it feels like nothing, because one loss is visible and the other is not. Behavioral economist Shlomo Benartzi has studied this phenomenon extensively. He calls it the illusion of safety in cash. People dramatically overestimate the risk of investing and dramatically underestimate the risk of not investing. The risk of the market is visible and jarring. The risk of inflation and opportunity cost is invisible and slow. But slow and invisible does not mean small. Over 40 years, it is often the largest financial mistake a person makes. Here is what the numbers look like when you compare two people with identical incomes over identical careers. Person A earns $60,000 a year for 40 years and saves 10%, $6,000 annually, in a high-interest savings account earning 2%. After 40 years, Person A has approximately $363,000. Person B earns the same $60,000 a year for 40 years and invests 10%, $6,000 annually, in a diversified index fund earning 7% annually. After 40 years, Person B has approximately $1,270,000. Same income, same savings rate, same 40 years. The difference is $900,000, nearly $1 million. Not from earning more, not from saving more, from where the money was placed. Person A did not make a reckless decision. They did not gamble. They did not overspend. They simply chose the option that felt safer. And that feeling of safety cost them nearly $1 million over the course of a working life. Now, consider the impact of starting late. The mathematics of compound interest do not just reward investing. They punish delay. Every year you wait to begin is not just a year of returns lost. It is a year of compounding lost on top of those returns. A 35-year-old who begins investing $6,000 a year at 7% will have approximately $720,000 at 65. A 25-year-old who begins investing the same amount will have approximately $1,270,000. The 10-year head start is worth over $550,000, not from investing more, from starting sooner. This is why financial planner and author William Bernstein argues that the most expensive financial mistake most people make is not a bad investment. It is inaction. It is the years spent meaning to start, waiting for the right moment, waiting until there is more money, waiting until the market settles down, waiting until life is less complicated. The market is never perfectly calm. Life is never perfectly ready. And every month of waiting is a month of compounding that cannot be recovered. There is also the inflation trap on the other side of the equation, in retirement. People who arrive at retirement with uninvested savings face a compounding problem. Not only did their money grow more slowly on the way in, it continues losing purchasing power on the way out. A retirement fund that never grew beyond what inflation allowed needs to last 20 or 30 years in an environment where prices never stop rising. The shortfall does not announce itself on day one of retirement. It appears gradually, a decade in, when the math of inflation and insufficient growth finally catches up with the math of monthly withdrawals. So what actually happens to money that is never invested? It shrinks in real terms, silently. Every year it sits still. It misses decades of compounding that can never be recovered. It arrives at the moment it is needed most significantly smaller than it could have been. And it does all of this while feeling completely safe, responsible, and under control. The savings account is not the enemy. Emergency funds belong in savings accounts. Short-term goals belong in savings accounts. But the money you will not need for 10, 20, or 30 years does not belong in a savings account. It belongs in the market, working, compounding, building the future version of your wealth while you live the present version of your life. You worked 40 years. You showed up. You earned it. The question was never whether to keep the money. The question was always where to put it so it could do the same.